The ground can open up and swallow a city whole. We are about to uncover 30 ancient cities that were not conquered by empires, but by the planet itself. By the end, you will see history through an entirely new lens, where earthquakes, volcanoes, and shifting seas are the silent architects of our past. What force could sink a legendary city like Atlantis in a single day? And why would a thriving port simply vanish into the waves? These are not just stories of loss, but urgent lessons written in stone and ash about the fragile line between a civilization and its foundation. What forgotten disaster do you think still whispers to us from the ruins? That line between civilization and chaos is not just a metaphor. It was a real street in a real city on a summer morning in the year 79. The city was a Roman port, and on that morning its residents went about their business completely unaware that the mountain looming over them, Mount Vesuvius, had already begun to stir. For days there had been tremors, but earthquakes were common in the region. The warnings were there, but they were misunderstood, a fatal misreading of the planet's subtle language. Then, around 1 in the afternoon, the mountain tore itself apart. A colossal column of ash and pumice rocketed 10 miles into the sky, darkening the sun. For the next 18 hours, a relentless hail of lightweight pumice stones and ash fell on Pompeii, piling up on roofs, clogging streets, and slowly sealing the city under a gray blanket. Many people fled in those first hours, but others stayed, sheltering in their homes, hoping to wait out the storm. They could not have comprehended what was coming next. In the early hours of the following day, the eruption column collapsed. This created a series of pyroclastic surges, waves of superheated gas, ash, and rock that raced down the mountain slopes at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. These surges were not lava flows. They were something far more lethal, a scorching, suffocating cloud that instantly enveloped everything in its path. The temperature within these clouds exceeded 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For the people remaining in Pompeii, there was no escape. The event was so immense that volcanologists estimate it released thermal energy equivalent to 100,000 times the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The city was not just buried, it was preserved in a state of suspended animation. The ash hardened around everything, from grand villas to simple loaves of bread left in ovens. Most poignant are the voids left in the ash by the victims themselves. Centuries later, archaeologists filled these spaces with plaster, creating haunting casts that capture the final moments of individuals and families. We see a man covering his face, a woman clutching her jewelry, a dog contorted in its final struggle. These are not artistic recreations, they are direct impressions of life interrupted. The story of the naturalist Pliny the Elder personalizes the chaos further. Stationed with the Roman fleet across the bay, he saw the eruption and sailed towards it, not as a fleeing refugee, but as a scholar and would-be rescuer. He famously declared, "Fortune favors the bold, but the volcano showed no such favor." He perished on the shore, likely overcome by toxic gases, his story recorded by his nephew, Pliny the Younger, whose letters provide our most detailed eyewitness account. Pompeii's rediscovery in the 18th century was a revelation, a perfectly preserved window into daily Roman life. The layers of pumice and ash that meant the end for its citizens became, for archaeologists, an unparalleled time capsule. We learned about their architecture, their art, their commerce, and their social structure from a city frozen in a single day. This event fundamentally reshaped the Roman understanding of natural hazards, proving that some forces were beyond even the empire's control. It forces a reflective question, one with stark modern relevance. With all our technology and monitoring, how would our societies respond if we received a similar, unequivocal warning today. Would we heed it in time, or would we, like so many in Pompeii, rationalize the danger until it was too late? The silence of Pompeii is a lesson written in ash, a stark reminder that the ground beneath our feet is not always a promise of permanence, but sometimes a prelude to oblivion. And while Vesuvius claims a famous place in history, it was far from the only volcano to rewrite human destiny. But the Mediterranean holds another, even older story of fire and water. Far to the east of Pompeii, on the island we now call Santorini, a civilization once thrived in the shadow of a different sleeping giant. This was the Minoan settlement of, a sophisticated port town of the Bronze Age, buzzing with trade, art, and innovation around the year 1600 BC. Its residents lived on the slopes of a massive volcano, a fact they were intimately aware of, yet they built a vibrant life there for generations. Then, the mountain awoke. The Thera eruption was not merely large, it was cataclysmic, a geological event orders of magnitude greater than the one that buried Pompeii. Modern research suggests it may have been one of the most powerful volcanic explosions in the last 10,000 years. The process began not with a bang, but with a series of warnings, powerful earthquakes that shook the island, giving the people of a crucial chance to evacuate. Archaeologists have found no remains of individuals within the town itself, a strong indication that the community heeded the tremors and fled. What they left behind, however, is a breathtaking snapshot of their world, sealed under layers of pumice and ash just as the eruption truly began. The excavation revealed a city frozen in time, but not in tragedy, in a moment of eerie abandonment. Exquisite frescoes adorn the walls, depicting antelopes, fishermen, and ceremonial gatherings with a vibrant, almost modern artistry. They had multi-story buildings with advanced plumbing systems, including flush toilets and a sophisticated network of pipes for hot and cold water. This was no primitive outpost, it was a pinnacle of Bronze Age engineering and culture. Then, the main phase of the eruption commenced, ejecting an unimaginable volume of material into the atmosphere. The volcano's magma chamber emptied, causing the land above it to collapse into a vast, seawater-filled caldera, the dramatic bay that defines Santorini's shape today. This sudden collapse is believed to have generated a tsunami of staggering proportions, a wall of water that radiated out across the Aegean Sea. Within hours, this tsunami would have crashed into the northern coast of Crete, the heartland of the Minoan civilization, over 60 miles away. The waves likely scoured coastal settlements, inundated fertile plains with, and may have severely damaged the great palace complexes like Knossos, crippling the Minoan fleet, their source of power and trade. The eruption's reach did not stop at the shoreline. A plume of ash and sulfuric aerosols spread across the hemisphere, recorded in tree rings as years of stunted growth and in ice cores from Greenland. This veil in the atmosphere likely caused several years of cooler temperatures and poor harvests across the Mediterranean and beyond, a climatic shockwave that would have strained every society it touched. The decline of the Minoans was not instantaneous, but this one-two punch of tsunami and climate disruption delivered a blow from which their maritime empire never fully recovered. It is here that geology brushes against legend. The story of a great island civilization, advanced and prosperous, swallowed by the sea in a day and a night of cataclysm, echoes powerfully. Could the memory of Thera's destruction, carried by refugees and traders, have seeded the tale of Atlantis that Plato would recount over a millennium later? Whether direct inspiration or a parallel myth born of shared trauma, the connection is compelling. The silence of, preserved so perfectly, and the fragmented ruins on Crete tell a dual story, one of a culture's brilliant zenith and the precariousness of its foundations. It makes us wonder how many of humanity's oldest flood myths are not mere allegory, but distant, distorted memories of very real geological nightmares. This theme of the Earth's sudden, transformative violence would repeat itself, but sometimes the danger came not from the mountains or the sea, but from the very ground a city was built upon. The power of the sea to claim a city was not always a slow, creeping process. Sometimes it happened in a single, violent night, as the people of the ancient Greek city of learned in the winter of 373 BC. A prominent member of the powerful Achaean League was a thriving coastal hub, known far and wide as the primary center for the worship of Poseidon, god of the sea and earthquakes. Its fate would become a chilling testament to the very powers its people sought to honor. According to the geographer Pausanias and other ancient writers, the disaster began with a series of intense tremors. These were not mere shakes, but violent convulsions that fractured the very foundation of the city. Then, as the ground shuddered, something even more terrifying occurred. The solid earth beneath streets and buildings turned, in an instant, into a liquid slurry. This process, known today as soil liquefaction, happens when saturated, sandy ground is subjected to intense shaking. The water pressure between the grains of sand increases so dramatically that the soil loses all its strength, behaving like a fluid. In that moment, the city's stability was utterly erased. Entire sections of simply slid into the dark waters of the Corinthian Gulf, but the horror was not over. The massive displacement of land and sea triggered a devastating tsunami, which surged back over the already shattered coastline, sweeping away any who had survived the initial collapse and submerging what little remained above the waves. By morning, the city was gone. Not just damaged, but erased from the landscape so completely that its precise location became a subject of myth and scholarly debate for over 2,000 years. The cultural impact was profound. For the ancient Greeks, this was not merely a geological accident. A city sacred to Poseidon, destroyed by an earthquake and swallowed by the sea, was seen as the ultimate act of divine wrath. The story served as a powerful moral lesson, a reminder of the gods' capricious power. For centuries, fishermen in the area would claim their nets sometimes snagged on the stone ruins of the lost city, a ghostly rumor that persisted but could not be proven. The mystery was finally solved in the late 1990s, when a team of archaeologists and geologists, working from the ancient descriptions, located the ruins. They were not out in the deep gulf, but buried under layers of sediment in a coastal plain, having been submerged and then silted over by centuries of river deposits. Excavations revealed the poignant remnants of a city frozen in its final moment, walls toppled in a uniform direction by the force of the tsunami. This discovery confirmed the ancient accounts with scientific precision, identifying the active fault as the culprit and the telltale signs of liquefaction in the soil samples. Story forced a practical shift in thinking for the ancient world, influencing how later cities considered their placement near fault lines and unstable ground. It prompts a question about memory and landscape. How does a society memorialize a place that physically vanishes? For the memorial was woven into myth and history, a permanent warning about the unstable ground upon which we build our lives. This theme of cities claimed by water would repeat across the globe. But next, we journey to a very different coast, where a legendary trading port did not vanish in a night, but was slowly, deliberately taken back by the jungle and the sea. The story shows a city vanishing in a single, violent night, but sometimes the earth reclaims its territory not with a sudden cataclysm, but with a slow, inexorable creep. Long before Britain was an island, It was connected to mainland Europe by a vast, low-lying plain known to scientists as. This was no barren tundra, but a rich, fertile landscape of hills, rivers, forests, and lagoons, teeming with wildlife and home to scattered communities of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. For thousands of years, these people lived on this land bridge, following migrating herds and thriving in a post-Ice Age paradise. Then, the world began to warm and the seas began to rise. This was not a disaster in the traditional sense, but a geological transformation so gradual it would have been almost imperceptible across a single lifetime. Generation after generation would have witnessed the slow encroachment, watching familiar hunting grounds become marshes and then shallow seas, as meltwater from retreating glaciers filled the ocean basins. The coastline was in constant, quiet retreat, but around 6,200 BC, this slow process received a terrifying acceleration. Off the coast of Norway, a colossal section of the continental shelf, known as the Slide, gave way. An underwater landslide the size of Scotland sent a devastating tsunami racing across the North Sea. For the remaining communities living on what had become a shrinking archipelago of low islands, this wave would have been a catastrophe of biblical proportions. Scouring the landscape and drowning the final vestiges of their home, research led by archaeologists like Vincent, using advanced seismic mapping of has painted a stunningly detailed picture of this lost world. Core samples pulled from the seabed contain ancient tree stumps, peat, pollen, and even the bones of land animals, all buried under layers of marine sediment. These are not just geological samples, they are pages from a drowned history book. Even more poignant are the human artifacts trawled up by fishermen for decades, a simple antler harpoon or a finely crafted flint tool, each one a silent testament to a society that walked where ships now sail. The loss was not the erasure of a single city, but of an entire country, a human geography completely rewritten by climate change. This event likely triggered waves of migration, pushing populations westward into what is now Britain and eastward into Europe, reshaping the demographic map of the continent. It also poses a profound question about cultural memory. Could the persistent flood myths found across European folklore, stories of great lands lost beneath the waves, be distant, fragmented echoes of this real, collective trauma passed down over hundreds of generations? The fate forces us to consider a different scale of disaster, one measured not in moments, but where the very stage upon which human history plays out can be fundamentally altered. It serves as a deep-time mirror to our own era, asking us what coastlines, what communities, might we ourselves be in the slow process of losing. This theme of water as a persistent, patient adversary sets the stage for a city that faced a similar, yet more intimate, struggle not against a rising ocean, but against its own sinking foundations. While Pompeii was smothered under a blanket of ash and pumice, its neighbor Herculaneum met a far more violent and intimate end. On that same day in 79, as the eruption of Vesuvius entered its most lethal phase, the mountain unleashed a series of pyroclastic density currents, a scientific term for avalanches of superheated gas, ash, and rock. But for Herculaneum, these currents had a terrifying twist. They mixed with groundwater and debris to become fast-moving rivers of boiling mud and volcanic slurry. Where Pompeii was buried, Herculaneum was entombed, sealed under a layer of material that eventually hardened into a rock-like tuff over 60 feet deep. The heat of these flows was beyond comprehension, estimated at over 900 degrees Fahrenheit. This heat was so extreme that it instantly vaporized soft tissue and caused the organic materials it touched to carbonize. This is why Herculaneum reveals a different kind of ghost, not plaster casts, but skeletal remains found in haunting, final poses. Some huddled together in boat sheds along the ancient shoreline, where they had sought a last-minute refuge from the sea that never came. The composition and behavior of these flows explain the city's unique preservation. The hot slurry penetrated every crevice, filling buildings from the ground up, and then solidifying into an airtight, concrete-like shell. This environment is what saved what the heat did not destroy. While Pompeii's wooden elements mostly rotted away, in Herculaneum carbonized wood survived. We can see beds, doors, and even a baby's crib. Most astonishing was the discovery in the 18th century of the Villa of the Papyri, a luxurious seaside home. Its library was filled with hundreds of scrolls, carbonized by the heat into fragile, blackened lumps. For centuries, they were considered unreadable, but modern technology like multispectral imaging is now slowly peeling back their layers, allowing scholars to recover lost works of Roman philosophy and literature thought gone forever. This presents a fascinating historical question. How does the method of a city's preservation shape what we learn about it? Pompeii shows us the vibrant, public snapshot of daily life, frozen in a moment of panic. Herculaneum, sealed in a sterile, deep tomb, offers a more intimate, structural view, revealing finer details of domestic life and even the thoughts in its libraries. The excavation itself tells a story of hardship, as digging through the hardened tuff proved immensely difficult, slowing exploration for centuries and ironically protecting much of the city from early, less careful archaeological methods. Herculaneum's fate is a crucial lesson in volcanic hazards, demonstrating that a single volcano can kill in multiple ways, from falling rock to suffocating ash to these devastating, ground-hugging torrents of heat. For modern volcanologists, understanding these different flow types is critical for predicting danger zones and saving lives. The two cities, destroyed by the same mountain on the same day, provide a comparative laboratory of disaster, reminding us that geology writes its history in varied and devastating scripts. This pattern of a city being sealed away, almost waiting to be found, would repeat itself in a very different corner of the world, where not volcanic mud, but the shifting sands of a trade route would conspire to hide a legendary oasis. The silent, patient adversary of water gave way to a far more abrupt and violent force, the collapsing mountain itself. High in the Peruvian Andes, the breathtaking citadel of stands as a testament to Inca genius, seemingly defying gravity on its sheer ridge. Yet its very existence is a constant dialogue with geological danger, a precarious balance between human ambition and the restless earth. While the sanctuary itself endures, its story is part of a broader Andean reality where entire cities have been crushed by the mountains they were built upon. This threat comes not from volcanoes or rising seas, but from catastrophic landslides, massive slope failures where entire faces of mountains give way, burying everything below. To understand this risk, we look not to, but to older sites like the pre-Inca spiritual center of. Nestled in a narrow valley, was a pilgrimage site for centuries, until it was likely struck by a massive debris flow, a torrent of mud, rock, and water that roared down the valley from destabilized slopes above. Archaeological layers show clear evidence of this event, with sections of the complex buried under meters of sediment, an abrupt end to its central role. What triggers such devastation in these mountains? The primary culprits are the same today as they were ago: intense seismic activity along the many fault lines that crisscross the Andes, and periods of extreme rainfall, often driven by the El climate pattern, which saturates the soil until it can no longer hold. The Inca, masters of their environment, were acutely aware of these dangers. Their engineering was a form of geological negotiation. They built with a technique called drystone masonry, fitting enormous blocks together with such precision that the walls could dance during an earthquake, swaying and settling without collapsing. Their famous agricultural terraces were not just for farming. They were massive retaining walls designed to stabilize slopes and control erosion, a brilliant fusion of utility and hazard mitigation. You can see evidence of this adaptive mindset at fortress sites where archaeologists have identified sections of walls that were clearly repaired or rebuilt after ancient seismic events. Even their spiritual beliefs reflected this reality, with legends of mountain deities or Apis who could shake the earth or send down rockslides as expressions of displeasure. The modern era shows the danger is not past. In 1941, a huge landslide triggered by heavy rains swept down the valley below, devastating the town and altering the landscape dramatically. A stark reminder that the geological forces the Inca contended with are still very much active. This ongoing threat shapes modern conservation, where scientists use laser scanning and satellite monitoring to watch for the slightest shift in the terrain. So this raises a profound question about resilience. How did ancient cultures not just build in these dangerous places, but thrive there for centuries? Their success was not in eliminating the risk, which is impossible, but in reading the landscape with profound respect, designing their societies around the hazards, and always being prepared to rebuild. The survival of is less a story of luck and more one of deep understanding, a lesson in listening to the whispers of the earth before it decides to roar. And sometimes, that roar came not from the mountains, but from deep within the plains, where the very soil could turn against those who walked upon it. The resilience of the Inca, built into their very stones, stands in stark contrast to a different kind of preservation, one born not of adaptation, but of sudden, perfect capture. In the fertile valley of what is now El Salvador, a small Maya farming village named was going about its evening around the year 600. Dinner was likely still in the cooking pots, tools were set aside in the thatched roof houses, and the community gardens were thriving. Then, without warning, the nearby Caldera volcano erupted. This was not a towering, fiery explosion like Vesuvius, but a different kind of event altogether, a phreatomagmatic eruption. This occurs when rising magma meets groundwater, causing a violent steam-driven explosion that pulverizes the rock into an incredibly fine, moist ash. This ash fell on not in burning chunks, but as a heavy, warm, relentless rain. It buried the entire village under nearly 17 feet of this soft, gray material, sealing it with such gentleness and speed that it left the structures and their contents perfectly intact. The villagers, given crucial minutes by the nature of the eruption, clearly fled, as no remains have been found. In their haste, they left behind a frozen moment of daily life, a time capsule so pristine it has been called the Pompeii. But here, the comparison shifts, for Pompeii shows us Roman urban life, while offers something far rarer, an intimate portrait of ordinary Maya commoners. Discovered entirely by accident in 1976, when a bulldozer cut through an ancient cornfield, the site was excavated by archaeologist Sheets, who realized the true miracle of the find. The volcanic ash, as it settled and hardened, created molds of everything it touched. When the organic material inside rotted away, it left perfect hollows in the ash. By carefully filling these voids with plaster, just as at Pompeii, Sheets and his team could recover the shapes of things that almost never survive, like the thatched roofs of homes, woven baskets, and even the leaves of garden plants. They could see the raised footpaths between dwellings, the exact layout of kitchen gardens with rows of maize and manioc still in place, and storage jars filled with beans and chili peppers. In one structure, identified as a community feasting hall, they found serving bowls still stacked, ready for a gathering that never happened. Perhaps most fascinating was the discovery of a special building, likely a shaman's house. Inside, they found a deer antler headdress, obsidian blades, and seeds of sacred plants, all part of a ritual bundle. This hints at the spiritual life woven into the fabric of their daily existence, a dimension of their world we rarely get to see. The footprints preserved in the ash tell their own silent story, showing paths of escape and moments of pause, perhaps to grab a child or a precious belonging. This level of detail forces us to ask, what do we truly learn about an ancient society from its grand temples and royal tombs? Teaches us that the heartbeat of a civilization is found in the homes of its farmers, in their cooking pots and their garden plots. It reveals sophisticated agricultural practices, like intensive gardening and irrigation, that sustained these communities. This disaster also presents a clarifying counterpoint to the great mystery of the classic Maya collapse centuries later, which is linked to prolonged drought and social upheaval. End was swift, geological, and oddly preserving, while the collapse was slow, climatic, and utterly erasing. One event saved a village for archaeology, the other dissolved kingdoms into the jungle. Stands as a profound reminder that sometimes, the very forces that end a story become the only reason we can still read its pages. But not all volcanic interventions were so gentle in their preservation. Some served as the direct, brutal catalyst for a society's final act. The fragility of a civilization can be measured by the fall of its greatest symbol. For the island of Rhodes, that symbol was the Colossus, a bronze titan standing over 100 feet tall, built to celebrate the city's successful defense against a siege. It was a marvel of Hellenistic engineering, a declaration of human triumph, and one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Then, in the year 226 BC, after standing for just 54 years, the earth itself delivered a verdict. A massive earthquake, likely originating from the deep Rhodes fracture zone in the Aegean Sea, struck the island with terrifying force. Historians like Strabo recorded the event, describing not just a toppled statue, but a city in ruins. The quake, estimated by modern geologists to have been a magnitude 7 or higher, would have caused the very ground to liquefy beneath foundations, shaking stone buildings apart. The Colossus, its knees reportedly buckling, crashed to the earth in a thunderous collapse. The engineering of the statue was itself a wonder. Constructed from bronze plates hammered over an iron and stone framework, it was a hollow giant. Debates have long swirled about its exact posture and location, whether it truly straddled the harbor entrance or stood on a prominent promontory, but its fall was absolute. The immediate aftermath saw a city focused on survival and recovery. Rhodes was a major maritime power, and the damage to its port and infrastructure would have had severe economic repercussions, disrupting the vital trade networks that were its lifeblood. Archaeological evidence from the island shows layers of destruction from this period, with collapsed structures and hastily built repairs telling a silent story of resilience. When the citizens petitioned the oracle at Delphi for guidance on rebuilding their fallen god, the response was a chilling warning. The oracle declared that the statue's fall was an act of Helios himself, and it should not be re-erected. This divine prohibition, whether a genuine religious decree or a pragmatic economic decision disguised as one, sealed the Colossus's fate. For centuries, the broken pieces of the giant lay where they fell, becoming a tourist attraction in their own right, a monument to ruin. It is said that nearly 900 years later, the bronze remnants were finally carted away and melted down, their metal repurposed for new tools and constructions, a literal recycling of a cultural icon. The fall of the Colossus became more than a local disaster. It entered the realm of enduring lore. The phrase "Colossus with feet of clay," from the biblical book of Daniel, written around this same era, speaks to something magnificent with a fatal weakness. While not directly about the Rhodes statue, the cultural echo is powerful, reflecting a new awareness that even the most monumental human achievements are vulnerable to the shifting earth. This event forces us to reflect on how disasters redefine symbols. The Colossus was transformed from a symbol of military victory and engineering pride into a lasting symbol of hubris and fragility. Its broken form, lying for centuries, served as a permanent, sobering lesson in the limits of human ambition against natural force. This seismic lesson would soon be felt far to the east, where another thriving city, built on a major trade route, would find its own foundations fatally compromised. The collapse of a great statue is a visible, dramatic end, but a civilization can also unravel from a slow, silent betrayal by the very resource that gave it life. For the Indus Valley city that resource was the great river that bore its civilization's name. This was no haphazard settlement. It was a masterpiece of early urban planning, with grid-like streets, uniform brick buildings, and the world's first known sophisticated sanitation system. Complete with covered drains and household bathrooms, for centuries it thrived as a pinnacle of the ancient world. Then, around 1900 BC, the city was not destroyed, but quietly, methodically abandoned. Its end came not with fire or quake, but with a profound shift in the water that defined it. The culprit was a complex interplay of geology and climate, a process known as river avulsion, where a river abandons its channel for a new course. Research led by geomorphologists paints a picture of a landscape in transition. The powerful monsoon rains that fed the Indus River system began to weaken. At the same time, tectonic uplift in the region, the slow rising of the land, altered the river's gradient, the gentle slope that guides its flow. This one-two punch had devastating consequences. With less water from the rains, the river's energy diminished, causing it to deposit more of its silt right in its own bed. This siltation raised the riverbed, making the waterway increasingly unstable and prone to sudden, catastrophic flooding when the rains did come. Then the avulsion likely occurred, the river leaping to a new path, leaving agricultural hinterland either parched or unpredictably swamped. The city itself tells this story in layers of mud, brick, and sediment. Archaeologists have found evidence of repeated rebuilding, with houses constructed on top of older foundations raised to escape flood deposits. Their brilliant drainage systems, a symbol of their advancement, were ultimately fighting a losing battle against environmental forces they could not control. The great public bath, a central feature of the city, fell into disuse, a powerful symbol of a society under profound stress. When the river that supplied trade routes shifted, the economic heart of the city faltered. Didn't vanish in a day, it emptied over generations, as people simply left in search of reliable water and stable land, a slow migration from urban complexity back towards simpler, rural life. This fate forces a different kind of question about collapse. We often look for a single, catastrophic event, but what if the end comes from 1,000 small failures? The story is a lesson in hydrological fragility, showing how a civilization engineered for a specific river can be undone when that river decides to move. It echoes the challenges faced by other riverine societies, from Mesopotamia to the Yellow River Valley, where the same waters that brought fertility could also bring ruin through silt and shift. Their quiet departure asks us to consider our own cities, built on coastlines and rivers, and what slow geological changes might already be that we have yet to fully perceive. Because while a river's betrayal can be gradual, the response of water in other forms can be terrifyingly swift, as a legendary Chinese city would soon discover. The same dependence on water that nourished could also deliver a far more violent reckoning. The legendary port of Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great and home to the Pharos lighthouse, one of the ancient world's wonders, faced this reality not once, but repeatedly. Its magnificent eastern harbor, the heart of Greco-Roman trade and culture, was built on a coastline that hid a terrible secret. In the year 365, a colossal earthquake, estimated to be a magnitude 8 or higher, struck deep beneath the sea near the island of Crete. This quake, originating along the immense Hellenic arc subduction zone, where the African plate slides under the Aegean, did more than shake the land. It violently displaced the ocean floor. That sudden shift generated a tsunami, a wave of staggering power that radiated out across the eastern Mediterranean. Within hours, it reached the Egyptian coast. The Roman historian left a vivid account, describing how the sea first, leaving ships stranded on the suddenly exposed seabed, only to return in a furious wall of water that smashed into the harbor and surged through the city's streets. The waves submerged the low-lying royal quarter, where palaces and grand villas stood, and battered the very base of the great Pharos lighthouse. While the lighthouse tower itself survived, its foundational structures were likely severely compromised. The tsunami also caused the collapse of sections of the massive causeway that connected the mainland to the island of Pharos and served as a crucial aqueduct, severing the city's supply in the aftermath. This was not a singular event. Geological studies of sediment cores taken from the harbor floor reveal distinct layers of marine sand and debris sandwiched between normal silt, a clear signature of multiple catastrophic inundations over centuries. Each of these tsunamis, triggered by similar seismic activity along the same volatile arc, would have reshaped the coastline, scoured the seabed, and inflicted immense damage on port infrastructure. From warehouses to breakwaters, the engineering response tells its own story. The massive breakwaters and sea walls you can see in ancient models of the harbor were not just for calm mooring. They were defensive fortifications in a constant battle against the sea's fury. The impact on trade and knowledge was profound. As a hub of global commerce, any major disruption to its port would ripple across the known world, stifling the flow of goods and ideas. While the great library of Alexandria's fate is complex and tied to many events, the repeated flooding of coastal districts certainly threatened collections of scrolls and documents stored in vulnerable lower levels. Adding a layer of environmental loss to its historical narrative, modern archaeology has brought this submerged history to light. Using sonar mapping and underwater excavations, teams led by French archaeologists have revealed the stunning ruins of the ancient royal quarter, now lying beneath the harbor's waters. They found toppled columns, statues of sphinxes and pharaohs, and the remnants of grand buildings, all silent witnesses to the waves that claimed them. This evidence confirms the historical accounts and shows a city in a perpetual cycle of rebuilding. So how does a great port adapt to a hazard that returns every few centuries? Alexandria's story is one of resilient urban planning, where each generation learned from the last, reinforcing defenses and sometimes retreating from the most vulnerable shores. It forces us to consider our own coastal megacities, many built on similar tectonic time bombs. The patience of geology means the interval between disasters can outlast human memory, allowing a bustling metropolis to grow in blissful ignorance of the submerged ruins beneath its waterfront. Alexandria's dialogue with the sea was a continuous negotiation, a theme that would find a terrifying parallel on the other side of the world. Where an entire culture faced a wave of such scale, it entered the realm of permanent legend. The sea's sudden violence contrasts sharply with a different kind of volcanic threat, one that moves not with explosive fury, but with a slow, relentless certainty. On the slopes of Hawaii's Big Island, the volcanoes Lawa and Kilauea do not erupt to bury history. They are history, continuously writing and rewriting the landscape. For the ancient Hawaiian communities living there, the danger was not a column of ash in the sky, but a river of fire on the ground, an effusive flow of lava that could advance for weeks or months, swallowing everything in its path. This is not the story of a single lost city, but of countless villages and farmlands that have vanished under successive layers of rock over centuries. A slow-motion geological process that shaped an entire culture's relationship with the land. Hawaiian lava is basaltic, with a low viscosity that allows it to flow freely, like syrup, often traveling miles from its vent. While these flows are typically slow enough to outwalk, their direction is unpredictable and their advance inexorable. When a flow reaches a community, there is no stopping it, only retreat. Oral histories and chants preserve the memory of these losses. Places like, which was famously claimed by a Kilauea flow in 1960, a modern echo of an ancient pattern. Geological maps tell the deeper story, showing vast fields of jagged aa and smooth pahoehoe lava rock that are, in fact, the graves of older settlements. Their stories preserved not in written records but in legend and lineage. The Hawaiian response to this perpetual threat was a profound cultural adaptation, a blend of practical resilience and deep spirituality. They became masters of using the very material that threatened them. They built their homes and temples, called heiau, from the volcanic rock, and crafted tools from the sharp obsidian glass that the eruptions produced. Agriculture was ingeniously adapted, with farmers planting in pockets of soil between younger lava flows, and developing intricate irrigation systems to bring water across the rocky plains. Perhaps most significant was the spiritual framework that gave meaning to the destruction. The volcano was, as, a powerful and capricious goddess. Eruptions were seen as expressions of her moods, her travels, or her conflicts with her siblings. This belief system was not a passive fear, but an active engagement. Places where lava entered the sea were considered sacred, the site of creation of new land. The Lawa petroglyph field, with thousands of carvings made by families, is located on a flow, suggesting a direct ritual connection to the volcanic landscape. This coexistence could still turn tragic in an instant. The eruption of Kilauea in 1790, for example, included a deadly explosive phase that sent a fast-moving cloud of hot gas and ash across a warrior party, leading to a significant loss of life. This event is preserved in footprints fossilized in the ash layer, a sobering archaeological record that altered the political landscape of the islands. It underscores the dual reality, a life of respectful adaptation punctuated by moments of sudden catastrophe. Modern monitoring of Hawaii's volcanoes, with its networks of seismometers and gas sensors, is a scientific extension of this ancient vigilance. It raises a compelling question for all of us. How does a living culture maintain its identity and traditions when the very ground it calls home is constantly being remade? The Hawaiian example shows that resilience is not about preventing change, but about weaving the reality of the hazard into the fabric of language, belief, and daily practice. It is a long-term conversation with fire, where loss is mourned, but new land is greeted as a relative, a child of. This persistent, shaping threat differs greatly from a disaster that strikes just once, but leaves a mystery so complete it fuels speculation for. Like the sudden silence that fell over a powerful civilization in the American Southwest, the slow transformation of a landscape is a story told in centuries, not in days. But sometimes, centuries of gradual change set the stage for a single night of absolute loss. In the marshy coastal wetlands of medieval Frisia, along what is now the German-Danish border, the prosperous trading town of thrived. Known for its lucrative salt trade, this was a community built on wealth extracted from the sea, a hub of commerce in the 14th century. Its people felt secure behind their network of dikes and mounds, believing they had tamed the tidal flats of the sea. They were tragically mistaken. Fate was sealed by a combination of human ingenuity and geological reality. To claim more land for farming and grazing, the settlers had systematically drained the waterlogged peat soils around their town. Peat is a spongy, organic material that compresses and shrinks dramatically when the water is removed. Over generations, this drainage caused the entire landscape to slowly sink, a process called subsidence. Was literally lowering itself closer to sea level, making its defensive dikes increasingly precarious. Then, the climate delivered a brutal blow. The era was the dawn of the Little Ice Age, a period of cooling temperatures and more frequent, violent North Sea storms. In January of 1362, a catastrophic cyclone, remembered as the Groat or Great Drowning of Men, slammed into the coast. Ferocious winds drove a massive storm surge against the weakened dikes. They crumbled. In one terrible night, the sea rushed in over the sunken peatlands, swallowing and dozens of other parishes whole. The town vanished beneath the waves, leaving only legends and a new expanse of open water called the Bay of. For centuries, it lived on solely in folklore as the Atlantis of the North, a cautionary tale of a sinful, wealthy city punished by divine flood. Fishermen told of hearing the drowned church bells ring on stormy nights, and of glimpsing ghostly towers beneath the waves at low tide. Modern science has turned legend into archaeological fact. During extreme low tides, the remnants of re-emerge from the mud. Researchers have mapped the outlines of its streets, the foundations of houses, and even the precise grid of its field systems. They have found wells, bronze cauldrons, and the traces of a massive sluice gate, evidence of the community's sophisticated water management that ultimately could not save them. The story of is a powerful lesson in compounded risk. It was not just a storm, and not just sinking ground, but the dangerous synergy of the two. The people had altered their environment for short-term gain, unknowingly amplifying their vulnerability to the very forces they sought to control. This raises an uncomfortable, modern parallel. How many of our own great cities, from Jakarta to New Orleans, are facing similar slow-motion subsidence from groundwater extraction or sediment compaction, while sea levels rise and storms intensify? Bells may ring as a warning from the past, reminding us that the most devastating disasters often occur where geological fragility meets human activity. This theme of human decisions magnifying natural fury finds a terrifying echo far from the North Sea, in a place where an entire mountainside decided to walk. Burying a community without a single rumble of earthquake, the legends of Jericho are written in both scripture and stone. For thousands of years, the story of Joshua and the trumpets that brought the walls tumbling down has been a cornerstone of faith and history. Yet beneath that powerful narrative, The very ground of the ancient city tells a different, but equally dramatic, tale of collapse. Jericho sits in a precarious and revealing location, nestled within the deep Jordan Rift Valley, right alongside the massive Dead Sea Transform Fault. This fault line is a major tectonic boundary where the Arabian and African plates grind past each other, a zone of immense and persistent seismic stress. It is a landscape literally built to shake. The city's famous spring, which provided a reliable water source and made Jericho a valuable oasis for, also anchored it to one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. Archaeologists excavating the immense mound, or tell, of ancient Jericho have uncovered a complex history written in layers of destruction and rebuilding. One of the most significant figures in this work was, whose meticulous excavations in the 1950s revealed a striking sequence. She identified a clear destruction layer from around 1400 BC, a time period that intriguingly aligns with the biblical chronology for Joshua's conquest. Within this layer, she found massive fortification walls that had not been toppled inward by battering rams, but had instead collapsed outward and downward, as if the ground had simply dropped out from under them. The stones lay in a heap at the base of the wall, and in some sections, the very foundations had slipped. This pattern is a textbook signature of seismic activity, not military assault. The physics of such an event are chillingly straightforward. When a powerful tremor strikes, the energy waves can cause the ground to liquefy, especially near a water source like Jericho's spring. A wall built on soil that suddenly behaves like liquid will not stand. It will slump, crumble, and fall in the precise manner documented. This geological reality invites a profound reflection on how ancient cultures interpreted catastrophic events. For a society living long before the science of plate tectonics, an earthquake that demolished the seemingly impregnable defenses of a mighty city would have been an act of divine power. The blending of a real, terrifying natural disaster with the story of a spiritual victory creates a powerful fusion of history and theology. It shows how environmental trauma can become embedded in a people's sacred texts, transforming a geological event into a pivotal moment of faith and identity. Jericho was not alone in this seismic vulnerability. Other powerful Canaanite city-states like Megiddo, also situated along or near this active fault system, show similar destruction layers from roughly the same era. This suggests a period of heightened seismic activity that may have weakened the entire urban fabric of the region, making these centers more susceptible to other pressures, including conflict. The story of Jericho's walls, therefore, exists in two parallel dimensions. In one, it is a miraculous event of faith. In the other, it is a sobering case study in geotechnical engineering. These dimensions are not in conflict. They simply speak to different ways of understanding the same momentous occurrence. The city's history is a cycle of quake, collapse, and stubborn rebirth, a testament to human resilience in a landscape that refuses to be still. This interplay between earth and belief in the Holy Land would see another, even more devastating seismic chapter, one that would claim not just a city's walls, but an entire metropolis famed for its grandeur and sin. The silence of is a profound record, but it is not the only story written in the ash of Thera. Just across a narrow channel lies the smaller island of, where the same eruption tells a tale of far more absolute and terrifying force. While was buried under a deep blanket of pumice, the communities on likely faced something different, the full, lateral fury of the volcano's opening blasts. This was not a gentle fall of ash, but a pyroclastic base surge, a ground-hugging wave of superheated gas, ash, and rock that expands outward from the vent at hurricane speeds. For anything or anyone in its direct path, there was no warning and no escape. The physics of such an event are chilling. When a volcano erupts with immense energy into a body of water or through a shallow vent, it can generate these surges, which behave like a fluid, scouring the landscape. Temperatures within them can reach several hundred degrees Celsius, and they move with such violence that they can strip away soil, flatten forests, and obliterate structures, leaving behind a thin, distinctive layer of fine ash and rock fragments that tells geologists the story of utter devastation. The archaeological record reflects this ferocity. Unlike researchers find no preserved buildings, no poignant frescoes, no layered streets. The evidence is almost purely geological, a stark sequence in the soil where a layer of surge deposits sits abruptly atop the older ground surface. Within this layer, the cultural traces are heartbreakingly sparse, perhaps a few shattered pottery fragments, pulverized and mixed with the volcanic material. This near-total erasure presents a unique challenge for understanding the past. How do we reconstruct a community when the disaster was so complete it left almost nothing behind? The work becomes one of meticulous geology and subtle inference. Scientists study the grain size and sorting of the ash, the direction of embedded fragments, and the way the layer drapes over the ancient topography to map the surge's path and power. They compare these findings to modern, like the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which produced devastating lateral blasts that leveled entire forests, leaving a similar signature of directional destruction. The fate of people remains a quiet mystery. Given the scale of the eruption, it is possible some had already evacuated in response to the earlier earthquakes, perhaps fleeing by boat to Crete or other islands. Yet for those who remained, or for those caught by the surge's unexpected lateral reach, the event would have been instantaneous. This kind of localized, ultra-violent phenomenon forces us to expand our understanding of volcanic risk, especially for island communities. It is not just the falling ash or the tsunami that follows, but the initial, directional blast that can erase everything in a single, searing moment. For modern volcanology, studying these ancient surge deposits is critical for modeling hazard zones around similar island volcanoes today, helping to predict which flanks are most vulnerable to such catastrophic opening moves. The story told almost entirely by stones and ash, amplifies the broader narrative of Thera. It reminds us that a single geological event can write history in multiple scripts, from the perfect preservation of a buried city to the near-total obliteration of its neighbors. This gradient of destruction, from the museum-like quiet to the blank slate challenges us to listen more carefully to what the Earth leaves behind, and to recognize that sometimes the most violent chapters are those with the fewest words. From these island fires, our journey turns inward, to a continent where an entire lake chose to release a breath of poison, leaving a different kind of silent aftermath. The silent, obliterating force of a volcanic surge finds a strange parallel in the very soil of one of history's greatest capitals. For the ancient Chinese city of En, the enemy was not fire from a mountain, but the ground upon which its splendor was built. As the glittering heart of multiple dynasties and the eastern terminus of the Silk Road, En, near modern En, was a metropolis of immense power and culture. Yet it sat in the shadow of the Les Plateaux, a vast landscape of wind-blown silt deposited over. This less soil, while fertile and easy to excavate, held a treacherous secret. When stable and dry, it forms vertical cliffs perfect for carving cave dwellings. But when saturated by heavy rains or shaken by seismic waves, its structure disintegrates in an instant, turning into a fluid slurry that can slide with devastating speed. This was the hidden geological fault line beneath the feet of emperors. The city's location within the seismically active Graben, a down-dropped valley block, meant earthquakes were a recurring threat. Historical records from the Tang dynasty, for instance, note landslides in the surrounding highlands that damaged outlying areas and infrastructure. The real danger came from liquefaction, the same process that doomed. During a tremor, the loosely packed, porous loess would lose all cohesion, causing entire hillsides to slump and flow. These landslides could bury suburbs, block vital canals supplying the city, and undermine the massive rammed earth walls that defined N's perimeter. Archaeology reveals the response: layers of reconstruction where foundations were reinforced and canals redug, a testament to a cycle of damage and stubborn renewal. The engineering of the city itself was a negotiation with this unstable earth. The widespread use of rammed earth construction, was both a practical use of local material and a potential vulnerability. While these walls were immensely thick and strong under normal conditions, a major seismic event could cause catastrophic collapses. The famous 1556 Seiche earthquake, one of the deadliest in human history, centered near this region, provided a horrifying later example. While it occurred long after N's imperial zenith, it demonstrated the lethal synergy of quakes and less, where landslides buried entire communities and accounted for a significant number of the tragic loss of life. For ancient N, each landslide event was a disruptive shock to the system, potentially halting the flow of Silk Road caravans, damaging imperial warehouses, and demanding immense resources for repair. This raises a profound question about urban resilience. How does a city not just survive, but thrive for centuries in a landscape that periodically tries to swallow it? N's answer was adaptation, not abandonment. Engineers became adept at managing water runoff to prevent saturation, and the city's layout may have been influenced by avoiding the most unstable slopes. Its persistence speaks to the power of cultural and economic momentum, where the city's role as a political and commercial hub justified the endless labor of rebuilding. Other cities built on less, like Lanzhou downstream on the Yellow River, faced similar challenges, their histories also marked by a dialogue between human ambition and unstable ground. N's story is one of endurance against a slow, recurring geological rhythm, a contrast to cities that met a single, definitive end. That finality is what awaited a different desert metropolis, whose lifeblood did not falter from sliding earth, but from a slow, relentless thirst. The ground beneath N could slide, but the water that reached Greenland's Norse settlers arrived with a sudden, icy violence. In the eastern settlement, Viking farmers had carved out a life for centuries on the very edge of the known world. Their existence, a fragile balance between Scandinavian tradition and an unforgiving Arctic environment. Their greatest adversary, however, was not the cold alone, but the unpredictable behavior of the ice itself. As the climate began to cool at the dawn of the Little Ice Age in the 14th century, a new and terrifying hazard emerged. These are catastrophic glacial outburst floods, occurring when a lake of meltwater, trapped under or within an ice sheet, suddenly finds a release. The trigger could be a volcanic tremor melting the ice from below, or simply the water pressure becoming so great it lifts the glacial dam and bursts free. For the Norse farms nestled in Greenland's fjords, the result was apocalyptic. A wall of water, ice, and rock would roar down from the ice sheet without warning, scouring valleys, obliterating pastures, and the very soil they depended on. Paleoclimatologists studying sediment cores from Greenland's fjords find distinct layers of coarse sand and gravel, deposits that can only be explained by immense, sudden flows of water. Silent geological testimony to these recurring disasters. The floods did not just destroy a season's crop, they could erase generations of labor, washing away the thin, precious topsoil that made agriculture possible in the north. This geological stress amplified every other challenge the colony faced. Sea ice was extending, blocking the vital shipping lanes to Iceland and Europe for longer periods each year, cutting off trade, timber imports, and contact with the homeland. At the same time, archaeological evidence from sites like the well-preserved church farm shows layers of abandonment, where tools were left in place and doors were simply walked away from. The Norse, stubbornly committed to their European way of life, continued to raise cattle and build stone churches in the style of their ancestors, even as the environment transformed around them. They did not adopt the more flexible maritime subsistence strategies of the Inuit, who were migrating into the region at the same time and thrived by hunting seals and whales from kayaks. The Inuit perspective, passed down through oral tradition, viewed the land as a dynamic system to be navigated, not a static territory to be dominated. For them, the ice and its floods were powerful forces to be respected and understood, part of the rhythm of life, not an anomaly. The ultimate collapse of the eastern settlement was a slow unraveling, a death by 1,000 cuts where climate change, isolation, and cultural inflexibility all played a role. But they represent a particularly sharp cut, a geological exclamation point in a long sentence of decline. They force us to ask a difficult question about adaptation, when the very landscape you have learned to survive in begins to behave in new and violent ways. How do you know when to change your ways? And when is it already too late? The Norse of Greenland clung to what they knew until the end, a poignant lesson in the limits of human resilience when faced with a shifting world. This story of a community facing a changing climate and a volatile finds a powerful and chilling parallel across the ocean. Where another civilization would be confronted by a drought of such scale, it reshaped a continent. While the Norse faced floods of ice, another civilization contended with a slower, quieter adversary, one that did not roar but whispered with every grain of sand. On the arid shores of Egypt's Red Sea, the port of Berenice once pulsed with life, a crucial gateway for Roman ships laden with incense, spices, and exotic goods from India. Founded in the 3rd century BC, it was a city built on the wealth of monsoon winds that carried merchants across the ocean. Yet those same atmospheric forces that filled its warehouses would ultimately conspire to bury it. Over centuries, the relentless patterns of the wind and a gradual drying of the region began to shift the dunes of the eastern desert. This was not a sudden cataclysm, but the geological process of Aeolian deposition, a slow-motion burial where sand, carried grain by grain, steadily encroached upon the city's streets and buildings. The harbor, its lifeblood, faced a parallel fate as silt carried by infrequent but violent flash floods gradually choked the anchorage, making it less viable for large trading vessels. By the 6th century AD, the combination of a silted port and a city fighting a losing battle against the dunes led to its abandonment. The sand did not destroy Berenice, it preserved it, creating an accidental time capsule sealed under the desert sun. Modern excavations peel back these layers of sand to reveal a remarkably intact snapshot of Roman frontier life. Archaeologists find the stark outlines of stone buildings, from administrative offices and temples to simple taverns and workshops, their walls still standing to roof height in some places. Within them, the dry climate and protective sand have preserved organic materials that would have vanished elsewhere. Fragments of ship timbers from the harbor, woven baskets, and even traces of the precious spices that were the city's reason for being, like peppercorns from India and frankincense, resin from Arabia. The city's struggle against its environment is etched into its very design. Ingenious water catchment systems, channels and cisterns were carved to capture every precious drop of rainfall from the surrounding hills, a testament to the constant battle for survival in a marginal landscape. This slow burial invites a different kind of question about disaster. How does a community respond to a threat that advances so gradually it is almost imperceptible within a single lifetime? Unlike an earthquake or tsunami, there is no single day of tragedy, no clear moment to flee. The end comes through a creeping consensus. As trade routes slowly shift to more accessible ports, maintenance becomes overwhelming, and one day the last family simply leaves, closing the door on a home already half filled with sand. Berenice can be compared to other legendary sites claimed by the desert, like the oasis city of in Arabia, mentioned in folklore as a wealthy center lost to the sands. While story is wrapped in myth, its potential reality, like Berenice, speaks to the powerful geological agency of arid regions, where shifting dunes can erase highways and swallow settlements whole. The silence of Berenice, then, is not one of violent interruption, but of gradual suffocation. It offers a profound lesson in the patience of geological forces, reminding us that sometimes the most formidable disasters are those that give ample warning, yet are too slow for human urgency to confront. This theme of the desert's transformative power sets the stage for a far more explosive arid zone event, where the earth did not quietly bury a city, but violently rebirthed the very land it stood upon. Far from the desert sands, a different kind of skyborne dust fell upon the greatest city north of Mexico. At its height around the year 1100, Cahokia was a thriving metropolis on the Mississippi floodplain, home to perhaps 20,000 people, with 100 earthen mounds. A central plaza larger than 30 football fields, and a sphere of influence that stretched across the continent. Its people, the Mississippians, were master farmers whose lives were governed by the sun and the fertile soil. Then the sky itself changed. Around the year 1085, over 1,000 miles to the southwest in what is now Arizona, the ground split open. The sunset crater volcano erupted in a fiery display, painting the sky with ash and cinders. While the explosion was not continent-shattering, its reach was astonishing. Prevailing westerly winds caught the finest particles of volcanic glass and minerals, a dust called, and carried them high across the continent. This invisible rain settled over the Midwest, leaving a chemical fingerprint in the soil layers that scientists can detect centuries later, a ghostly signature of an event no living would have seen. The ashfall would not have buried streets or collapsed homes. Its impact was far more subtle and potentially more insidious. A persistent veil of fine particles in the atmosphere can dim the sun, leading to cooler growing seasons and shorter summers. When this tephra settled onto the fields, it could have altered soil chemistry, potentially locking away nutrients or making the ground more acidic. For a society utterly dependent on maize agriculture, a few consecutive years of poor harvests would not just mean hunger, it would mean a crisis of faith and authority. The ruling class at Cahokia, who derived their power from guaranteeing agricultural abundance and mediating with the spiritual world, would have faced an unprecedented challenge. How do you explain a failing sun and sickly crops when you are believed to be the conduit to the forces that control them? Archaeology reveals a society in flux during this period. There is evidence of crop diversification, a turn toward hardier strains of corn, or an increased reliance on foraging, a practical adaptation to environmental stress. More intriguing are the potential spiritual responses. The great wooden circle known as a solar calendar comprised of large cedar posts may have been rebuilt or realigned in the aftermath. Was this an attempt to recalibrate their understanding of a sun that seemed to be behaving erratically? The ash fall from a distant volcano could have been interpreted as a profound sky event, a sign of displeasure from the gods or a shift in the cosmic order. This geological event did not cause Cahokia's decline in isolation, but it likely acted as a powerful catalyst, compounding existing pressures like localized flooding and resource depletion. It forces us to consider a new scale of vulnerability, how a civilization can be shaken by a geological event it never witnessed, a tremor felt not in the ground, but in the harvest and in the human heart. The story of Cahokia and the sunset crater Thera is a lesson in atmospheric connectivity, showing that in an interconnected world, even a remote eruption can send ripples across a continent. Testing the resilience of societies far beyond the shadow of the mountain. This idea of a distant, indirect threat stands in stark contrast to what came next for other cities, where the geological danger was not a whisper on the wind, but a direct and devastating blow from the earth itself. The skyborne dust that troubled Cahokia was a subtle, invisible threat, but for the great port of Ephesus, the danger was written in the very earth it stood upon. This legendary city, home to one of the seven wonders, the Temple of Artemis, faced a slow-motion geological crisis that no army could defeat. Its lifeblood was its harbor, a bustling gateway on the Aegean coast that connected the wealth of Asia to the Roman world. Yet over centuries, that harbor began to choke and die, not from enemy blockades, but from the relentless, patient work of the nearby river. Each flood season, the river carried millions of tons of silt down from the mountains, depositing it in a growing delta that steadily pushed the coastline westward, away from the city's docks. What was once a deepwater anchorage became a shallow, malarial marsh. This was a classic case of delta, a natural geological process where a river builds new land at its mouth, but for Ephesus, it was an economic death sentence. The city's engineers fought back with immense effort, dredging canals and building new harbor basins, but they were engaged in a battle they could not ultimately win. They were trying to hold back the literal reshaping of the landscape. Compounding this watery siege was the unstable ground beneath their feet. Ephesus sat in a seismically active zone, crisscrossed by faults associated with the Aegean plate's complex movements. Major earthquakes, like the devastating one in the year 17, would rip through the city, not just toppling buildings but creating deep fissures in the earth itself. These ground cracks were catastrophic for infrastructure, severing the vital aqueducts that brought fresh water from the hills and undermining the foundations of temples and libraries. Archaeological excavations reveal a story of stubborn resilience in these layers. The magnificent library of, whose facade still stuns visitors today, shows clear signs of being rebuilt after such a seismic event. The city's grand streets, like the famous street, were repaved multiple times over the centuries, each new layer covering the repairs made after the ground had shaken. The response was a gradual, reluctant retreat. As the harbor silted up and the lower city became more prone to flooding and illness, the civic heart of Ephesus began to shift. The focus moved uphill, toward the area around the great Byzantine church dedicated to Saint John, built on higher, more stable ground. This migration marked a profound change, from a cosmopolitan maritime power to a more inland religious center. You can trace this silting timeline in the archaeological record, from the deepwater port facilities of the Roman era to the constrained Byzantine docks. And finally, to the complete abandonment of the harbor area in the medieval period. The very wonder that defined the city, the Temple of Artemis, was itself eventually buried under many feet of alluvial silt, its location lost for centuries. This poses a challenging question about managing decline. When faced with an environmental degradation that unfolds over generations, how does a society decide when to stop fighting the landscape and instead adapt to its new reality? The people of Ephesus tried heroic engineering, but the geological forces were simply too vast. Their story is a lesson in the limits of ancient infrastructure against the twin pressures of plate tectonics and sedimentary geology. Modern preservation efforts now face the opposite challenge, working to protect the sun-bleached stone ruins from the elements and the wear of countless footsteps. A reminder that the processes that buried the city are now the very things that keep its memory alive. This slow strangulation of a harbor finds a violent contrast in our next event, where a different body of water did not retreat, but instead rose up in a single, catastrophic night to claim a kingdom. The same water that carved the sacred of the could also betray the cities built above them. At a major Maya center occupied for over 3,000 years, survival depended on a delicate geological bargain. The entire peninsula is a vast slab of porous limestone, a karst landscape where rainwater, slightly acidic from absorbing carbon dioxide in the air, slowly dissolves the rock over. This process creates an invisible world of caves and caverns beneath the surface, and where the ceilings of these cavities collapse, they form the iconic sinkholes known as. For the Maya, these were not just water sources in a land with no surface rivers. They were portals to the underworld, or places of profound spiritual significance. But the very geology that provided life also held a latent threat. The city of was literally built on a honeycomb of unstable ground. Archaeological surveys reveal that its builders often constructed their platforms and temples directly over these hidden cavities, sometimes reinforcing the ground with rubble fill in an attempt to create a stable foundation. Over centuries, the slow process of dissolution continued, and the weight of stone buildings could stress these fragile ceilings. During periods of severe drought, which tree ring and sediment records show occurred with devastating frequency, the danger increased dramatically. As the water table dropped, it left empty cavities that had previously been supported by water pressure. This made the limestone roofs more prone to sudden collapse. You can see evidence of this struggle in the settlement pattern itself. Is famously spread out, with structures scattered over a wide area rather than densely packed. Some researchers suggest this low-density urban plan may have been a conscious adaptation to the risky substrate, avoiding placing too much concentrated weight on any one potentially weak point. The city's most famous structure, the Temple of the Seven Dolls, is poignantly aligned so that the rising sun shines directly through its doorways during the equinoxes. This celestial connection, a hallmark of Maya genius, is framed by a landscape of both spiritual and physical depth, as the temple sits in a ceremonial complex linked to a major. This duality captures the Maya worldview perfectly, where the practical need for water and the spiritual journey to the underworld were intertwined with the same geological feature. The management of this hazard required constant vigilance. Keeping them clear of debris for water access also meant monitoring the stability of their rims and the land radiating outward. A sudden sinkhole collapse near a critical residential compound or ceremonial platform would have been seen as far more than a structural failure. It could be interpreted as a breach in the covenant with the gods below. How does a civilization spiritually negotiate with a landscape that can literally swallow its achievements? Long occupation suggests they succeeded for a very long time, likely through a combination of careful observation, ritual appeasement, and adaptive engineering. Other great Maya cities like Tikal, also built on a karst foundation, faced similar challenges, their immense pyramids exerting tremendous pressure on the subterranean voids. The silent, ongoing collapse of limestone beneath these cities was a geological rhythm as constant as the seasonal rains, a slow-motion hazard they learned to live with. Until other pressures like prolonged drought made the balance impossible to maintain. This hidden vulnerability beneath the forest floor reminds us that the most enduring threats are often the ones we cannot see, patiently shaping destiny from the darkness below. Antioch was a jewel of the late Roman world, a metropolis of 500,000, where the wealth of the Silk Road flowed into ornate colonnaded streets. On a spring day in the year 526, during the festival of the Ascension, the city was packed with visitors. Then, without warning, the ground convulsed in a magnitude 7.0 earthquake, a direct result of the immense tectonic pressures building along the nearby East Anatolian Fault. Part of the vast Dead Sea transform system, the violence was absolute. Stone buildings, from crowded tenements to the magnificent octagonal Great Church, crumbled into rubble, burying tens of thousands in an instant. The chronicler John recorded the horror, describing how the tremors triggered raging fires that swept through the ruins for days, compounding the devastation and making rescue nearly impossible. The final toll was staggering, with contemporary accounts suggesting a loss of 250,000 lives, a catastrophe that would scar the Byzantine Empire. Geology explains the sheer force of this event. The city sits in the basin, a fertile plain that is essentially a tectonic trap, a depression created by the slow grinding of plates. Studies of this basin reveal clear fault scarps, long ridges in the earth where the ground has ruptured in past quakes, and layers of sediment showing evidence of widespread liquefaction. Where solid earth turned to liquid soup beneath the city's foundations. This unstable setting, combined with Antioch's immense urban density, created a perfect storm for tragedy. The very concentration of people and magnificent architecture that symbolized its power became its greatest vulnerability when the earth moved. The aftermath posed a profound challenge to imperial resilience. Emperor Justin I, and later his nephew Justinian, launched massive reconstruction efforts, pouring treasure into rebuilding the city's walls and grandest monuments. Yet the economic and psychological damage was deep. As a crucial node on the Silk Road, the disruption to trade reverberated across continents, weakening a vital economic artery. For early Christianity, the destruction of a patriarchal seat and so many faithful during a holy festival was a spiritual shock, interpreted by many as a divine judgment that required penitence and renewal. The city was rebuilt, but it never fully regained its former preeminence, beginning a long decline that later invasions would cement. This forces a difficult question about the limits of imperial power. How does even the most sophisticated state recover when a geological event erases not just buildings, but the very confidence and commercial networks that sustain a civilization? Antioch's fate is a stark lesson in tectonic destiny, reminding us that some of history's most pivotal urban disasters are not random acts, but the inevitable release of pressures that have been building for centuries, waiting for a single, terrible moment to rewrite a city's story. The relentless, transformative power of water takes a terrifyingly specific form on the slopes of a rumbling giant. In the heart of Java, the sacred and volatile mount, whose name literally means mountain of fire, has shaped human destiny not just with its fiery eruptions, but with the cold, suffocating mud that follows. For the ancient settlements nestled in its fertile valleys, the greatest threat often arrived not with the eruption itself, but months or even years later in the form of a lahar. A lahar is a volcanic mudflow, a dense river of rock, ash, and water that can race down river valleys at highway speeds, swallowing everything in its path. These flows are a secondary, patient hazard, born when monsoon rains saturate the loose volcanic debris blanketing the mountainside, turning it into a deadly slurry. The historical eruption of Mount around the year 1006 is shrouded in legend, but geological evidence suggests it was cataclysmic, possibly triggering the collapse of the Hindu kingdom and prompting a royal move eastward. This event speaks to a recurring cycle where communities are drawn to the volcano's incredibly rich soil, only to face the periodic price of that fertility. The mechanics of a lahar are a chilling lesson in delayed destruction. After a major eruption, the landscape is transformed. Valleys are filled with millions of tons of loose ash, sand, and boulders, a landscape primed for disaster. When the heavy tropical rains return, this unstable material cannot absorb the water. Instead, it becomes mobilized, flowing with the consistency of wet concrete. These flows can be triggered decades after the last eruption, a geological debt that can come due without warning. Volcanologists studying note that its frequent dome collapses generate pyroclastic flows, which themselves are devastating, but also deposit fresh, hot material directly into the headwaters of rivers. This sets the stage for immediate, scorching lahars, or provides the fuel for rain-triggered flows seasons later. The archaeological record in the region, particularly around the great Buddhist temple of Borobudur built in the 9th century, shows signs of volcanic influence. While not buried by a lahar itself, Borobudur's construction and later abandonment may be linked to the broader environmental disruption and population shifts caused by periodic fury. The cultural response to this ever-present danger was woven into the spiritual fabric of Javanese society. Both Hindu and Buddhist traditions developed rituals and temple placements that reflected a deep respect for the mountain's power, was seen as a spiritual axis, a realm of deities and ancestors. Offerings were made to appease its spirits, a practice that continues to this day. This spiritual negotiation was paired with remarkably pragmatic adaptations. Villages were often situated on natural levees or higher ground just outside the main lahar channels, a form of ancestral hazard zoning learned through painful experience. The discovery of sites like a Hindu temple found buried under several meters of volcanic ash and likely lahar sediment demonstrates the scale of these events. Its preservation, much like a time capsule, offers a direct window into the moment the flow hit, with structures intact but filled to their roofs. The modern era provides a stark, real-time echo of this ancient struggle. The 2010 eruption was one of its most violent in over a century, generating pyroclastic flows that claimed many lives. In the aftermath, the threat shifted to the rivers choked with new debris. Early warning systems, a high-tech version of ancient vigilance, now monitor rainfall and ground vibrations, giving downstream communities precious minutes to evacuate when a lahar is detected. This blend of deep tradition and modern science highlights the enduring question: how do societies not only rebuild, but choose to remain in landscapes of such profound risk? The answer lies in a complex calculus of heritage, livelihood, and a resilient acceptance that the source of both life and loss is one and the same. The memory of lahars smothering Javanese settlements is not a story of defeat, but of a continuous, respectful dialogue with a living mountain. A relationship where every layer of mud also adds a layer of meaning to the human story. This intimate dance with an island volcano finds a dramatic counterpoint on a much larger stage, where an entire sea could vanish in a geological instant, leaving a civilization stranded in the desert. The patient hunger of the sea can erase a city not with a single wave, but with 1,000 tides. On the soft, crumbling cliffs of England's Suffolk coast, the medieval port learned this lesson across centuries, its story not one of cataclysm, but of a slow, inevitable vanishing. In its 13th century prime was a powerhouse, a bustling hub of trade with perhaps as many as 5,000 residents, a dozen churches, monasteries, and a busy harbor that rivaled London's. It was a city of wealth and consequence, its prosperity built on the very waters that would ultimately consume it. The geology here was its fatal flaw. The coastline is composed of glacial sediments, layers of soft clay, sand, and gravel deposited by ancient ice sheets. These cliffs offered no lasting resistance to the relentless energy of the North Sea. Each storm surge, each punishing wave, would undercut the base of the cliffs, sending great sections of the town tumbling into the churning water below. This process, coastal erosion, is a quiet geological force, but over time its power is absolute. Historical maps from the 16th and 17th centuries tell a heartbreaking story of retreat. They chart the sequential loss of landmarks, one by one. All Saints' Church, once safely inland, is shown perilously close to the cliff edge in one map, and simply gone in the next, its foundations claimed by the sea. The harbor silted up as the protective spits of land eroded away, strangling the maritime trade that was the city's lifeblood. The economic shift was gradual but final, as merchants and mariners moved their operations to more stable ports like across the river. The climate of the era, the onset of the Little Ice Age, played a crucial role in accelerating the end. This period of cooling brought with it more frequent and violent North Sea storms. The increased storm frequency meant the soft cliffs faced a more constant assault, with fewer calm periods for the land to recover. A major storm in 1286 is often cited as a turning point, sweeping away hundreds of homes and forever altering the harbor, but it was merely one dramatic chapter in a much longer story of decline. By the 16th century was a ghost of itself, its urban footprint mostly lost beneath the waves, reduced to the small village that exists today. The legends that grew from this loss are hauntingly beautiful. For generations, fishermen and residents spoke of hearing the drowned church bells ringing from beneath the sea on stormy nights, a phantom echo of the community that was. These stories are not just folklore, they are a form of cultural memory, a way for a place to grieve a loss that happened too slowly for anyone to witness in full. Modern science has given voice to these whispers. Underwater archaeology, using sonar and submersibles, has mapped the sunken cityscape. Researchers have located the remnants of medieval streets, the foundations of churches like St. Peter's, and even the substantial stone blocks of a once mighty harbor wall lying on the seabed. These ruins, resting in the silty darkness, confirm the historical accounts and reveal the true scale of what was lost. Each artifact recovered, a medieval pottery shard or a stone mason's tool, is a tangible piece of a world that slipped away grain by grain. This poses a profound question about how we measure disaster. When a city disappears not in a day, but over 400 years, how does a community mark its passing? There is no single day of mourning, only a creeping realization that the home of your grandparents will not exist for you. Fate is a powerful lesson in geological patience and a stark preview of challenges faced by coastal communities worldwide today. Its story forces us to look at our own shorelines and ask, what slow-motion disappearances are we already living through, and when does a retreat become an undeniable reality? This theme of the coastline as a shifting, uncertain frontier sets the stage for an event of far more sudden and violent transformation, where an entire bay was created in a single, earth-shattering night. The sea does not always advance. Sometimes it simply steps back, leaving a city stranded. This was the quiet fate of Tell el-Bahrain, the ancient heart of the legendary civilization, a trading hub whose wealth flowed from the waters of the Persian Gulf. For over 4,000 years, this was a place of immense importance, a verdant island of commerce mentioned in Sumerian epics as a paradise and a crucial link between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. Yet by around 600 AD, its role as a premier port had faded, not because the sea turned violent, but because it began a slow, steady retreat. The culprit was a monumental, yet subtle geological force, the relentless northward push of the Arabian tectonic plate. As this massive slab of the Earth's crust collides with the Eurasian plate, its leading edge is forced upward. The entire coastline of Bahrain and eastern Arabia is experiencing this gradual ascent, a tectonic uplift measured in just a few millimeters per year. To human eyes, this change is invisible across a lifetime, but over centuries its effect is transformative. The shoreline slowly rose, they became shallower, and the vital harbors began to silt up. What was once a deepwater anchorage for wooden trading ships became a muddy flat, pushing the life-giving sea further from the city's gates with each passing generation. The archaeological record at Tell el-Bahrain, a massive stratified mound, tells this story with perfect clarity. Excavations reveal a continuous sequence of occupation from the Bronze Age through the Islamic era, a layer cake of civilizations. Crucially, the lower, older layers contain clear evidence of maritime activity, with artifacts and structures tied to a bustling port. As you move upward through time, the connection to the sea becomes more distant, both literally and in the material left behind. The city's engineers likely fought a constant, losing battle, dredging channels and extending piers, only to watch the land stubbornly reclaim more of their waterfront. This geological shift did not just inconvenience traders, it struck at the core of the city's identity and economy. Its prosperity was built on the pearl trade, the exchange of copper from Oman, and the transshipment of luxury goods. A silted harbor meant economic strangulation. Furthermore, the island's famous springs, which bubbled up from underground aquifers and gave Bahrain its ancient name meaning two seas, of salt and fresh water, may have also been affected by the changing land levels and water tables. These springs were not just practical resources, they were sacred, central to the mythology of as a pure, blessed land. The grand burial mounds that dot the landscape, the temples with their unique architectural seals, all speak of a sophisticated society deeply connected to its environment. When that environment shifted imperceptibly but inexorably, the center of gravity simply moved. The focus of habitation and commerce gradually migrated northeast to the site of present-day Manama, which offered a more viable coastline for the changing maritime technology and trade patterns of the new era. This raises a quiet but profound question about urban destiny. How does a community decide when to stop maintaining a legacy and instead follow the functional geography? The abandonment of Tell el-Bahrain was not a dramatic evacuation, but a slow demographic drift, a collective, unspoken acknowledgement that the land had changed the terms of the agreement. This event connects to other ports like Ephesus, which also fought a losing battle against silt, but with a key difference. At Ephesus, the river brought the land to the sea. Here, tectonic forces lifted the land up and away from the sea. Both stories, however, share the same lesson, that the most successful cities are those built not just on geography, but on an understanding that geography itself is a temporary condition. The uplift of Bahrain is in geological patience, a force that works on a timescale beyond kings and empires, quietly redrawing the maps upon which human ambition is written. But the Earth's breath is not always a gentle mist or a healing spring. In the classical city of, built upon the dazzling white travertine terraces of in Turkey, the same geological forces that created a paradise also concealed a silent, invisible threat. Here, the Roman world built a magnificent spa city, a destination for healing and luxury, all powered by the thermal waters that bubbled up from deep below. Yet these waters carried a hidden passenger, carbon dioxide, released by the volcanic activity simmering beneath the region's fractured crust. The city's very foundation was a network of active fault lines, and these cracks in the earth acted as conduits, allowing this dense, odorless gas to seep to the surface, particularly in low-lying, confined spaces. At the sacred site known as the Plutonium, a small grotto or cave was revered as a gateway to the underworld. Ancient writers like Strabo described a chilling scene, where priests would demonstrate their divine favor by entering the cavern unharmed, while animals brought to the entrance would quickly succumb. We now understand the science behind this ancient ritual. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air. In a calm, enclosed space like the plutonium, it would pool at ground level, creating an invisible, suffocating layer. A priest, holding his breath or standing upright where the air might still be breathable, could appear miraculously protected. A small animal, with its head in the deadly CO2 pool, would quickly be overcome. These spots are known to geologists as moffets, natural vents for volcanic gases. For the people of, this lethal gas was not just a hazard, it was integrated into their spiritual and economic world. The city's entire identity was built around the dual nature of these geological gifts. The same faults that vented carbon dioxide also channeled the hot, mineral-rich water that fed the famous baths and created the stunning travertine terraces. This was a place where the boundary between the therapeutic and the toxic was perilously thin. The engineering of the city reflects a sophisticated understanding of this environment. They constructed elaborate aqueducts and channel systems to manage the hot springs, creating public baths that were marvels of Roman hydraulics. The city itself was repeatedly rebuilt after major earthquakes, demonstrating a resilient acceptance of the volatile land they inhabited. The economy thrived on tourism and healing, with visitors coming from across the empire to bathe in the waters, turning a geological phenomenon into a cultural and commercial powerhouse. This poses a fascinating question about human adaptation. How does a society not just live with, but actively celebrate, a force that could kill without warning? The answer was a blend of ritual, practical knowledge, and architectural brilliance. The dangerous plutonium was, its power claimed by religion and spectacle. The beneficial springs were harnessed with precision for public good. Modern research continues to study these emissions, monitoring gas levels to protect today's visitors, a scientific echo of the ancient priests' cautious demonstrations. The story of is a powerful lesson in geological duality. It shows that the elements which define a place, which give it wealth and purpose, are often the very same ones that demand the utmost respect. The city did not conquer its environment. It learned to perform a delicate, ongoing dance with the Earth's exhaled breath, finding prosperity in the precise space between the healing waters and the suffocating cave. This awareness of the atmosphere itself as a potential vector of disaster leads us to consider events where the very air a civilization breathed turned against it, not from a single vent, but from a change written across the entire sky. The silent, breathless threat of a gas-filled cave is a local danger, but the ocean can deliver a violence that reshapes an entire coastline in minutes. For the people, the world's first known practitioners of complex mummification, life was a constant dialogue with the sea along the stark shores of the desert. Around 3800 BC, that dialogue turned into a roar. Geological research along the Chilean coast reveals a startling layer in the earth, a band of marine sand, crushed shells, and cobbles found high on ancient terraces, far from the reach of any normal wave. This deposit tells a story of a mega-tsunami, a wall of water perhaps over 20 meters high that crashed inland with unimaginable force. The likely trigger was a colossal earthquake along the trench, where the plate dives beneath South America, or a massive submarine landslide on the steep continental slope. For the villages, built just above the shoreline to harvest the rich marine life, there would have been little warning. The wave would have scoured the coastal plain, sweeping away lightweight shelters made of whalebone and hide, scattering the very shell middens that marked their daily lives, and depositing them far inland as a grim geological signature. Sites like this show layers of occupation abruptly capped by this sterile band of tsunami sand, followed by a period of abandonment, a silent testament to the wave's devastating impact. This event forces us to consider a profound question about memory. How does a society with no written language record and process a catastrophe of such scale? For the answer may be woven into their most famous cultural practice, their elaborate mummification. They created the oldest artificial mummies in the world, thousands of years before the Egyptians, carefully eviscerating, reconstructing, and painting the bodies of their loved ones, from the elderly to even the very young. While this practice certainly had deep spiritual roots concerning death and the afterlife, some researchers suggest that such an intense, collective focus on preserving the physical form could have been a cultural response to profound loss, a way to assert control and continuity in a world where the sea could suddenly erase an entire community. Their adaptation was remarkable. Despite the disaster, the culture persisted for, a testament to resilience. They were not wiped out, but they likely learned from the event. Later settlements show a subtle shift, with campsites perhaps positioned on slightly higher ground, a generational memory of the water's reach encoded in their choice of home. Their entire existence was an inn living off a harsh but abundant marine environment, and the tsunami was the ultimate reminder that their provider could also become their destroyer. This prehistoric disaster finds eerie echoes in the modern era along the same coast. The Great Chile Earthquake of 1960, the most powerful ever recorded, generated a Pacific-wide tsunami that devastated communities from Hilo to Japan. The geological setting is unchanged. The tectonic pressures are constant, meaning this experience was not a singular event, but a recurring chapter in the region's deep history. Their story, told by sand layers and painted mummies, reminds us that humanity's relationship with the coast has always been a gamble with geological time, where the interval between cataclysms can be longer than civilization itself, allowing memory to fade and cities to rise again on the same vulnerable shores. Even in the deep freeze of the Siberian Arctic, the ground itself can be a temporary foundation. Was a city born from ice and ambition, a fabulously wealthy trading post established in the early 1600s on the banks of the mighty Kolyma River. It was the gateway to the Siberian fur trade, a place where sable pelts, the black gold of the era, were exchanged for silver, textiles, and goods from across the Russian Empire. For decades, it thrived as a bustling frontier metropolis, a wooden island of commerce in a vast, white wilderness. Its wealth was built upon a geological condition everyone took for granted, the permanent frost, or permafrost, that locked the soil into a solid, reliable platform. But permanence in geology is always a relative term. As the global climate gradually emerged from the Little Ice Age in the 17th century, temperatures in the Arctic began a subtle, inexorable climb. This warming initiated a slow-motion disaster beneath the city's very streets. The permafrost began to thaw. This process is not a simple melting of ice, but a complex geological transformation. When ice-rich permafrost thaws, the ground loses its structural integrity. The ice wedges that once acted like a concrete reinforcement melt away, and the soil collapses into a waterlogged, unstable mire. This creates a landscape known as thermokarst, characterized by sinking ground, erratic ponds, and slumping hillsides. For this meant the solid earth beneath its log buildings and warehouses turned to a weak, saturated slurry. Structures began to tilt at surreal angles, walls cracked, and floors buckled as their foundations sank unevenly into the muck. The Kolyma River, its banks also destabilized by the thaw, began to shift its course, eroding the ground the city depended on and cutting it off from its vital transport route. The process was not swift, but it was relentless. Over decades, the combination of structural failure and a shifting river made the city increasingly impractical and dangerous to inhabit. The economic heart of the fur trade simply relocated to more stable ground, leaving to its slow burial. The very cold that betrayed the city then performed a final act of irony, preserving its remains. Excavations at the site reveal a haunting tableau. Log cabins and palisade walls slumped and askew, frozen in the moment of their surrender to the mud. The permafrost acted as a deep freezer, safeguarding delicate artifacts that would have rotted anywhere else: leather boots, fur fragments, intricate wooden tools, and even coins. Offering an immaculate snapshot of daily life on a crumbling frontier. This event forces a profound question about our assumptions of stability. How do our grandest settlements interact with landscapes we assume are static, when in fact they are delicately balanced on a climatic knife edge? Seiche is an early, poignant chapter in the story of climate-driven geology, a demonstration that a warming world does not just change the weather, it can literally pull the ground out from under our feet. Modern parallels are stark, as contemporary Arctic towns face similar thermokarst subsidence, damaging roads, pipelines, and buildings, proving that this ancient Siberian lesson is urgently relevant today. This theme of climate unlocking geological change sets the stage for our next event, where warming did not soften the ground, but instead unleashed a torrent from a long-dormant ice tomb. Even the most resilient cultures can be divided by walls of stone, not built by human hands. In the highlands of Ethiopia, the ancient predecessors to the storied city of faced a geological barrier far more permanent than any army, a relentless tide of basalt lava. This rock, born from the fiery heart of the continent, did not bury cities in an instant, but instead performed a slow, surgical act of isolation, reshaping the very pathways of human life across generations. The source of this transformation lies in the Afar Triangle, a geological cauldron where the African continent is literally tearing itself apart, part of the vast Great Rift Valley. Here, volcanic fields like those surrounding the perpetually active Aile volcano have episodically spilled forth floods of low-viscosity basalt lava. These flows can travel vast distances, cooling into vast, barren plains of jagged rock known as lava fields. For early settlements in the region, a single such event could have catastrophic consequences not by direct destruction, but by severance. Imagine a thriving community situated near a vital river, or a crucial mountain pass for trade. A new lava flow, creeping forward over weeks, could permanently divert that river, drowning fertile valleys in sterile rock, or it could seal off the pass entirely, cutting the lifeline of commerce and contact that sustained the society. The community might not be erased, but its world would suddenly become much smaller, its future constrained by a new, impassable wall of black stone. Geological surveys of the region tell this story in silent cartography. Maps reveal the stark outlines of young lava flows, some only centuries old, lying adjacent to known archaeological sites from the pre-Aksumite and early Aksumite periods. These overlapping timelines suggest a long history of human adaptation to a periodically rewritten landscape. People learned to anticipate the rumble of the earth and the glow on the horizon, not as an omen of immediate doom, but as a signal that their geography might be about to change in fundamental ways. This environment demanded profound cultural adaptation. The people of the highlands became masters of using the very material that threatened them. They the volcanic basalt and tuff to build their iconic structures, from the mysterious stelae of pre-Aksumite sites to the great foundations of Aksum itself. The rock provided durable tools and grinding stones, its sharp edges fashioned into efficient scrapers and blades. Agriculture, too, was a negotiation with the volcanic earth. While fresh lava flows are sterile, over centuries they weather into incredibly fertile soils. Communities learn to identify these rich pockets, cultivating, or the false banana, and teff on the volcanic slopes, turning geological adversity into agricultural bounty. The spiritual world mirrored this volatile reality. Volcanoes and fissures were seen as powerful spiritual sites, places where the divine made its presence known through the earth's raw power. Rituals and offerings sought to appease these forces, integrating the unpredictable geology into a coherent cosmology. This stands in contrast to the fate of the great kingdom of Aksum, which rose to power further north. While Aksum itself was spared direct burial by lava flows, its foundation was deeply shaken by the seismic activity that accompanies continental rifting. The magnificent stelae, some toppled in antiquity, may bear witness to powerful earthquakes that challenged the kingdom's engineers and perhaps its confidence. This juxtaposition within a single region highlights the varied geological menu of hazards, from earth-shaking quakes to landscape-sealing lava. It prompts a reflective question about the origins of cultural heartlands. How many of the world's great civilizations were shaped not just by the resources a landscape offered, but by the specific ways it constrained and channeled human movement. The lava fields of Ethiopia did not just destroy, they redirected, forcing populations into new alliances, innovations, and migrations. The persistence of, and the earlier echoes of its predecessors, is a story of human resilience in dialogue with a continent in the act of its own creation. A reminder that sometimes the most enduring geological events are those that build barriers, not bury cities. The silent, patient threat of a lake is not in its depth, but in its sudden, sloshing violence. On the high shores of lake, the spiritual and political heart of the state thrived for centuries, a city of stone aligned with the stars and sustained by ingenious agriculture. Then, around 1000 AD, the ground shuddered, and the lake responded not with a gentle ripple, but with a seiche, a standing wave that can turn a placid inland sea into a destructive force. A seiche is a sloshing of water in an enclosed or semi-enclosed basin, like a giant bathtub. When a powerful earthquake rattles the surrounding mountains, the seismic energy transfers into the lake, causing the entire body of water to rock back and forth. These oscillations can build over minutes, creating waves that surge far beyond the normal shoreline, only to recede and surge again in a rhythmic, devastating cycle. For vital port facilities and its famous raised agricultural fields, or built right at the water's edge, a major Seiche would have been catastrophic. The wave would have scoured the intricate canals, flooded the nutrient-rich planting beds with cold lake water, and smashed docks and storage buildings. This was not a tsunami from a distant ocean, but a homegrown hazard, a geological echo of the Andean fault lines playing out in the very water that gave the city life. Research into the lake's sediment cores tells a compelling story. Scientists find distinct layers of coarse sand and lakebed material deposited suddenly over older, finer muds. These are flood deposits, and their timing coincides with known periods of intense seismic activity in the region. It is a geological fingerprint of the lake leaping from its basin. Its engineering was a marvel precisely because it understood water. They were not just fields, they were a climate-proofing system. By creating a grid of raised earth platforms surrounded by water-filled canals, farmers created microclimates that protected crops from frost and drought. The canals themselves were a feat of hydraulic management. A Seiche wave, however, was an opponent they could not design for, a shock to a system built on precise, gentle water control. The flooding would have soils, disrupted planting cycles for years, and destroyed the seasonal harvests that fed the city's dense population and its labor force. This geological stress arrived alongside another slow-moving crisis, a prolonged drought that caused lake's water levels to fall significantly over subsequent decades. The one-two punch of sudden floods and a long retreat of the shoreline would have crippled the agricultural base and strained the social contract that held the state together. We see the cultural response etched into the landscape at the ceremonial complex of Puma. Here, the monumental stonework, with its famously precise, interlocking blocks, lies in a state of dramatic disarray. While the exact cause is debated, the alignment of massive stones tossed like toys is consistent with the force of seismic shaking or powerful water action. The city's grand spiritual center, with its monolithic gate of the sun, survived on higher ground, but the supporting infrastructure below was vulnerable. This likely triggered a strategic retreat, a gradual shift of population and political focus away from the battered lakeshore to more defensible or reliable areas. This event forces us to reconsider what makes a body of water dangerous. We rightly fear the ocean's tsunamis, but a lake, especially one in a tectonically active mountain basin, holds its own quiet potential for chaos. This experience is mirrored in other lake cities throughout history, from Geneva, where seiches are a documented phenomenon, to ancient settlements around the Dead Sea, where seismic activity could have triggered similar waves. The story of is a lesson in interconnected vulnerability, where the earth's shake can turn a civilization's greatest asset into its agent of ruin. It asks a final, haunting question as we approach our last event. If a society as advanced as could be unraveled by the sloshing of its own lake, what does that say about the stability of any foundation, anywhere? This brings us to the 30th and final cataclysm, a disaster of such immense and intimate scale that it did not just destroy a city, but erased the very memory of an entire way of life. Waiting for us beneath the waves of the Black Sea, but the most absolute geological reset does not come from water or shifting ground, but from the fire that can erase an island from the map. The thunderous explosion of Krakatoa in 1883 is etched into history, but that cataclysm was merely the latest chapter in a far deeper story of annihilation. Long before that famous blast, the very archipelago itself was home to earlier communities. their existence utterly vaporized by a caldera-forming eruption of almost unimaginable power. Likely around the year 416, this event represents the ultimate geological finale, a force so immense it can obliterate the stage upon which human history is performed. The scale of such an eruption defies ordinary understanding. A caldera forms when a volcano's magma chamber empties so completely that the mountain's summit collapses inward, creating a vast, bowl-shaped depression often miles wide. For the ancient Krakatoa, this was not an eruption, it was a geological self-destruction. The energy released would have dwarfed even the 1883 event, sending cubic miles of rock and ash into the stratosphere and generating tsunamis that would have scoured coastlines across the strait and beyond. Seabed core samples tell this silent, layered history, revealing thick deposits of pumice and ash from these ancient explosions, far below the sediments of more recent times. Any settlement on those islands would have vanished in an instant, leaving no ruins, no artifacts, no physical trace for archaeologists to find. The destruction was so total it creates a unique kind of historical silence, where the only evidence is geological, not human. This creates a profound puzzle of memory. How does a culture remember an event that leaves no ruins to rediscover? The answer may lie in the resilient tapestry of oral tradition. The Javanese Book of Kings, speaks of a distant time when a great mountain burst apart with a sound heard as far as Sumatra, darkening the sky and drowning the land. While not a precise historical record, such legends often preserve the core truth of a cataclysmic event, passed down through hundreds of generations, transforming geology into myth. These stories likely circulated through the maritime networks of later empires like a powerful whose traders plied those very waters. A sudden, ancient disruption to sea lanes and coastal villages from tsunamis and ash fall could have entered collective memory as a time when the geography of the world was fundamentally changed. The biological story on the remnant islands provides its own testament to this cycle of death and rebirth. After such an eruption, the land is sterilized, a blank slate of volcanic rock. The gradual return of life, from the first hardy ferns to dense tropical forest, is a slow-motion miracle of ecological recovery that has happened repeatedly there. This resilience of nature stands in stark contrast to the absolute vulnerability of human settlement in the volcano's shadow. Today, we witness this ongoing geological drama in real time with the Child of Krakatoa, a new volcano rising from the caldera formed in 1883. Its growth and periodic eruptions are a powerful reminder that the process is not over, that the land here is still being written and rewritten by fire. This final event brings our journey to a sobering close. From Pompeii's ashen preservation to the absolute erasure of ancient Krakatoa, we have seen 30 ways the Earth has reshaped human destiny. These are not just tales of loss, but profound lessons in humility, adaptation, and memory. They ask us to look at our own cities, our own coastlines and fault lines, and to listen. The ground holds stories far older than our oldest books, written in layers of ash, shifts of stone, and the silent patience of the sea. The past whispers that permanence is an illusion, and that our greatest legacy may be the wisdom to build not for forever, but with a deep respect for the powerful, living planet we call home. These 30 stories are not isolated tragedies, but chapters in a single, sprawling narrative about humanity's relationship with a restless planet. A clear, unsettling pattern emerges. Civilizations have consistently flourished in the very places most prone to geological violence. We built our greatest cities on fertile volcanic plains, along life-giving yet shifting rivers, and on coastlines that connected us to the world, but also to tsunamis. This was not a foolish gamble, but a calculated risk. The rewards of rich soil, strategic harbors, and mineral wealth were simply too great to ignore. The cradle of civilization was often a geological fault line. This deep interconnection between human progress and planetary dynamism forces us to see history through a new lens, one where the rise and fall of empires can be traced not just in treaties and battles, but in layers of ash and shifts in sediment. Unraveling these stories today is a feat of modern detective work, a collaboration between disciplines that once rarely spoke. The archaeologist's trowel uncovers a collapsed wall, but it is the geologist who identifies the telltale signs of liquefaction in the soil beneath it. The climatologist's ice core, showing a spike in volcanic sulfates, provides a date that explains a layer of famine in historical records. By reading the Earth's own archives, tree rings, seabed cores, and ice layers, we can cross-reference human events with planetary ones, turning legend into a timeline written in stone and ice. This scientific synthesis does not diminish the human experience of these disasters, it deepens it, allowing us to understand the precise mechanisms of a tragedy and appreciate the scale of the challenge our ancestors faced. This historical perspective carries urgent lessons for our own time. Our modern megacities, from Tokyo to San Francisco, Istanbul to Jakarta, sit atop the same volatile zones that claimed ancient or Antioch. The difference is one of scale. Millions now live where thousands once did, and the complex web of global infrastructure means a single seismic event can send shockwaves through the world economy. The ancient practice of rebuilding in place, seen in Ephesus or N, is mirrored today, but with far greater consequences. Yet we also inherit their ingenuity. The earthquake-resistant designs pioneered by the Inca, using flexible stonework, find their echo in the base isolators and damping systems of modern skyscrapers. Our early warning systems for tsunamis and lahars are the technological of the generational memory that guided villagers to build on higher ground after a flood. There is also a profound cultural dimension to how we engage with these sites of past loss. Excavating a city like Pompeii is an act of reverence and responsibility. We are not merely unearthing artifacts, we are listening to the final moments of a community, and with that comes an ethical duty to treat their resting place with respect. These are not just archaeological digs, they are memorials, teaching us about vulnerability, resilience, and the universal rhythms of daily life that transcend. The very act of preserving these ruins is a statement, a declaration that we choose to remember, to learn, and to honor those who came before us by applying their hard-won lessons. So what does this grand geological narrative tell us about our future? It tells us that the planet's dynamism is not a historical curiosity, but an ongoing reality. Climate change acts as a force multiplier, intensifying many of these ancient threats, rising seas pressuring coastal cities like modern, while changing precipitation patterns can destabilize slopes or worsen droughts. The story is not inevitably one of doom, but of conscious choice. We have the knowledge our ancestors lacked, the ability to map fault lines, model storm surges, and monitor volcanic gas emissions. The ultimate test of our civilization may not be whether we can prevent the next great quake or eruption, but whether we can build societies flexible enough to absorb the shock, compassionate enough to protect the vulnerable, and wise enough to sometimes retreat from the shore. The silent stones of 30 lost cities ask us a single, echoing question: will we be remembered as those who ignored the whispers of the earth? Or as those who finally learned to listen? The ground holds more than just foundations, it holds our shared story. From the ash-covered streets of Pompeii to the sunken harbors of Alexandria, we have walked through 30 moments where the Earth's immense power intersected with human ambition. Each event is a profound dialogue, a conversation between civilization and the planet that built it, reminding us that the forces which give us fertile soil and strategic harbors are the same ones that can reclaim them. This is not a history of defeat, but a testament to resilience, a chronicle of societies that faced the unimaginable and whose echoes still teach us today. The silent architect of history is not always a king or a conqueror. It is the slow grind of tectonic plates, the patient rise of the sea, and the sudden breath of a volcano. By listening to these geological whispers, we gain something priceless: insight. We see the ingenuity of the Inca, building walls that could dance during an earthquake. We witness the pragmatic adaptation of the Maya, spreading their cities across unstable limestone to avoid concentrated weight. These are not just ancient solutions, they are blueprints for a mindset, one that prioritizes adaptation over domination and respect over arrogance. Our modern world, with its sprawling coastal megacities and dense urban centers, sits on the same geological stage. The lessons from these lost cities are not locked in the past, they are urgent guides for our future. They speak to the core of sustainability, showing us that true resilience is not about building walls high enough to stop the ocean, but about designing societies flexible enough to absorb the shock when it comes. They ask us to consider the fragility of our own landscapes, to look at the fault lines and floodplains we call home with new eyes, and to make choices informed by deep time. So let this journey change how you see the world beneath your feet. Let the memory of spells remind you of the sea's patience, and the tilted stones of worn of ground that is not as permanent as it seems. History's greatest teacher is often its most silent one. If these echoes from the past have resonated with you, consider subscribing for more journeys into the mysteries that shape our world. We would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these geological events left you most captivated, and why? Thank you for exploring these lost worlds with us. May the stories written in stone and ash inspire us all to build a future that listens, learns, and endures.